Now, as promised, the news in detail. Saudi Arabia says it is ready to support a peaceful political solution to the conflict in Yemen. Defense Minister Khalid bin Salman says the kingdom is committed to the well-being of the Yemeni people. Meeting with UN Special Envoy Martin Griffiths, the Saudi Defense Minister called on Houthi rebels to uphold their signed commitments, including the Stockholm Agreement. Earlier, the UN said Yemen's warring sides have agreed to bolster a ceasefire deal and reduce tensions around the port of Hodeidah. It said both sides have agreed on the technical aspects of a troop withdrawal. The UN Security Council has extended its ceasefire observation mission in Hodeidah by 6 months. Well, the UN has voiced concern over tough restrictions imposed by the U.S. on Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif's movement in New York. Iran's top diplomat is visiting the U.S. to attend a meeting at the UN headquarters. Despite issuing a visa to Zarif, the U.S. has barred him from moving beyond 6 blocks of Iran's UN mission in New York. Last month, Washington threatened to impose sanctions on Zarif, adding to tensions with Tehran. Meanwhile, at a meeting of European Union foreign ministers in Brussels, the EU has said it does not see Tehran's actions as enough to break the 2015 nuclear deal. EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini said members have no intention to trigger the accord's dispute process. Earlier, UN watchdog IAEA confirmed that Iran has exceeded stock limits of low-enriched uranium agreed upon in the 2015 deal.
For the time being, with the current data we have had, in particular from the IAEA, that the non-compliance is considered to be a significant non-compliance.
Meanwhile, France's President Emmanuel Macron has said he will talk to the leaders of Iran, Russia, and the U.S. to prevent an escalation of tensions in the Middle East. Now, UK leadership hopeful Boris Johnson has said he will not back the U.S. if it takes military action against Iran. Foreign Minister Jeremy Hunt, for his part, said the U.S. and Iran are not looking to start a war. Hunt and Johnson were taking part in the final head-to-head debate of the Conservative leadership campaign. The two candidates said even a significant concession from the EU on the Irish border would be insufficient. Both contenders stressed the need to de-escalate Gulf tensions.
We are working to do at the moment is to try and de-escalate as many of the tensions as we possibly can, because this is the one part of the world where if things go wrong, they can go wrong in a very big and bad way, and that's why we've absolutely got to be on our watch.
Well, the winner of the UK's leadership race will be announced on July 23rd, and May will officially relinquish the keys to 10 Downing Street on July 24th. Moving on with the news, 5 Afghan soldiers and 11 Taliban fighters have been killed during clashes in northern Afghanistan. 4 soldiers and 7 insurgents were also wounded. The military says clashes erupted after Taliban fighters stormed security checkpoints in Faryab province. Staying with Afghanistan, that country's independent human rights commission says almost 600 civilians have been killed over the last 3 months. The commission says almost 2,000 others were wounded in clashes between government forces and Taliban insurgents. The head of the commission, Musa Mahmoudi, says over 700 children have been killed or wounded. Mahmoudi criticized the government for not doing enough to prevent civilian casualties. The Defense Ministry disputes the report's findings, saying it is taking every measure to protect civilians during its operations. Elsewhere, a civilian has been killed and 25 others have been wounded in 2 suicide explosions at a mosque in Iraq's capital, Baghdad. Witnesses say the bombs went off at the mosque and a nearby funerary tent. They say a bomber exploded his suicide vest straight after the first explosion. Security forces cordoned off the scene and have launched an investigation. No group has so far claimed responsibility. Iraq has been hit by many such blasts recently, claimed by ISIS. Now, scores of demonstrators have taken to the streets of Khartoum to protest against the killing of a civilian, allegedly by paramilitary troops. Police fired tear gas and baton-charged demonstrators to disperse the crowd. Witnesses say similar demonstrations have also taken place in other parts of the country. This comes after further delays to the signing of a power-sharing deal between the military and civilian opposition. The civilian opposition says the agreement will be signed after a constitutional declaration that determines the powers of the new ruling council. Turkey says the EU's decision to curb contacts and funding will not affect its drilling for gas off the coast of Cyprus. The Turkish Foreign Ministry has also condemned the European Union's decision to suspend high-level talks on the divided island. It's accused the EU of being biased and partisan over Cyprus. This comes after Austria and Germany proposed new sanctions on Turkey at a meeting of the EU's Foreign Affairs Council. The Council decided to suspend negotiations on an air transport agreement with Ankara. It also agreed to temporarily end high-level dialogue with Turkey. Ankara stands to lose €150 million in pre-accession EU funding earmarked for 2020. On to Latin America, a Venezuelan government delegation has arrived in Barbados to take part in a new round of talks with the opposition. These negotiations aim to establish a peaceful mechanism to settle the disputes. President Maduro's communication minister, Jorge Rodriguez, says the government is trying to find a constitutional and democratic resolution to differences. Envoys representing opposition leader Juan Guaido at the talks say they are aiming for a change in government. Last week, rival factions agreed to set up a platform for negotiations mediated by Norway after 3 days of talks on the Caribbean island. Monsoon storms, meanwhile, and flooding have wreaked havoc across South Asia, claiming 180 lives over the last 5 days. Nepal has been the worst hit, with flash flooding and landslides killing 78 people and injuring 30 others. 22 people have been killed and 7 others have been injured in a flash flood here in Pakistan's Neelam Valley. 28 people have lost their lives in northeastern India as well. 12 people have been killed by lightning in Bangladesh. Well, for more on the storms and the ensuing floods, we're now joined by our New Delhi correspondent, Neha Punya. Neha, thanks for joining us. Now, what more can you tell us about officials in India, Nepal and Bangladesh and what they're saying about the scale of the humanitarian crisis that has been brought on by these monsoon storms?
The devastation has been quite massive and widespread. When you speak of Nepal, about 10,000 people have been displaced. Nepal has been the worst hit, with over 60 deaths reported, and the flooding there has been quite extensive, so much so that in many areas the flood waters are now flooding into the North Indian state of Bihar that shares a border with Nepal. In Bihar, you've got 5 rivers that are flowing in spate. The Chief Minister, a short while back, held an aerial review of the worst hit areas as well. Many of those living in rural areas or living in makeshift homes are bearing the brunt of this deluge, and millions have been evacuated in Bihar. In Assam, which is the worst hit state in India, 4 million people have been displaced so far. The government has set up about 200 odd relief centers. 83,000 people have been evacuated so far. The army and paramilitary forces have been pressed into the rescue and relief operations. And in Bangladesh, an area that's not new to these kind of weather patterns, about 5,000 people have lost their homes. Many of them live in the Cox's Bazar district, which is home to 1 million Rohingya refugees. These are concerns that were voiced way back at the beginning of the year, that this area is going to be very vulnerable in the event of excessive rainfall or even flooding.
So Neha, tell us, what are meteorologists saying? Should we expect further flooding across the subcontinent?
You're right in saying that this area is not new to seeing this kind of deluge. In fact, in the state of Assam and Bihar, we see these kind of headlines every year. It's a similar story in Bangladesh and Nepal as well, and that's the question that authorities are also grappling with. After last year's devastating floods in Assam, the government said it is working on flood mitigation plans, essentially ensuring that the embankments of rivers are strengthened. There would be a closer look at the kind of encroachment that's happened on riverbeds and the kind of urbanization that takes place in a completely unchecked fashion. But this is a twofold problem. One, we're also seeing, because of climate change, weather patterns have become more intense. They become slightly less predictable. So that is one problem that authorities are dealing with. Two, of course, like I said, the human intervention problem, which will need a long-term solution. The government also admits here in India that often evacuating people from their homes, especially in rural areas, is a massive challenge. So that is an aspect that the government says they're going to be working on in the years ahead.
We'll leave it there at that, Neha, but of course, as always, we appreciate your reporting for us. We're going to go now into a short break, viewers. Stay tuned, though. A lot more news still to come. We begin this segment of the Bulletin right here in Pakistan. Rescuers have pulled out a coal miner alive after 40 hours trapped in a collapsed coal mine in Balochistan province. The bodies of 4 others have also been recovered. Officials say the men were working 4,000 feet below the ground when they were trapped by an electrical fire. The Director General of the PDMA, Imran Khan Zarkun, confirmed the rescue, saying the search for the other 6 miners is continuing. Officials say the fire, caused by a short circuit, began the spread of poisonous carbon monoxide gas throughout the mine. Most coal mines in the province are notorious for their poor safety standards, as similar accidents have occurred in the past. Well, Pakistan has fully reopened its airspace for Indian civil traffic after a 5-month-long standoff with New Delhi. Pakistan's aviation authority said the airspace is now open for all types of civilian traffic. The country closed its airspace in February in the wake of Indian Air Force attacks in northern Pakistan. Partial operations in Pakistan did resume when tensions softened. Pakistan lies in the middle of a vital aviation corridor, and the restrictions affected hundreds of commercial and cargo flights each day. Well, the United Nations says more than 821 million people suffered from hunger last year. The UN report launched in New York says reaching the zero hunger target by 2030 is an immense challenge. The report says after decades of decline, malnutrition began to increase in 2015 due to climate change and war. This is the 3rd year in a row the number has risen. The UN report says malnutrition remains widespread in Africa, with 20% of the population there affected. In Asia, more than 12% of people experience hunger. In Latin America and the Caribbean, the number is 7%. The annual report says hunger is increasing in countries where economic growth is lagging. It has found that since 2012, no progress has been made in reducing low birth weight. In related news, another UN report has said 20 million children missed out on life-saving vaccines last year. Prepared by UNICEF and the World Health Organization, the report pointed to the alarming cut in global vaccination rates due to conflicts and inequality. According to the report, the vaccination coverage against diphtheria, tetanus, and measles has stalled at 86% since 2010. It said measles cases around the globe doubled last year, with 2019 set to be even worse.
Very substantial. There are 19.4 million children who remain in 2018 who have been either fully unimmunized or under-immunized. And that means that more than 1 in 10 children are not getting the full complement of the vaccines that they need, are missing out on life-saving vaccines.
Almost half the world's unvaccinated children are in just 16 countries, and if these children fall ill, they are at severe risk of health consequences and are least able to get the treatment that they need. Let's move on now to Italy, where doctors in Rome have warned people to stay away from roadside garbage dumps. Stray animals feasting on the piles of trash have created a possible health emergency. Meanwhile, locals are fuming over the lack of waste management in the city. More in this report.
Any mention of Rome usually brings the city's cultural heritage or great Italian food to mind. But nowadays, tourists are navigating overflowing rubbish bins in the stifling heat. Doctors have warned the city may have a health emergency on its hands.
With this heat and with this situation, there could be a hygienic emergency in the sense that we must remain vigilant to avoid that it could turn into a health emergency. Prevention is better than a cure, as they say, so we decided to alert all the institutional actors in the system.
The garbage also attracts animals, which cause even more problems.
I live in the center, where it's even worse because there are seagulls, mice, all kinds of animals, mosquitoes, flies, full of insects and animals. That's enough.
Locals blame the government, which they say is corrupt to the core.
This is the most disorganized capital in the world for everything, for buses too, everything. If something goes wrong, it's in Rome for sure.
On the 10th of July, Environment Minister Sergio Costa vowed to resolve the problem within 15 days. Rome generates 5,000 tons of garbage daily, and the city doesn't even have its own incinerator. The scale of the problem, combined with the government's alleged inefficiency, makes it unlikely Costa will be able to deliver on his promise. For now, though, overflowing dumpsters are as much a feature of Rome as the Colosseum or the Pantheon.
Let's stay in Europe. In France, authorities are aiming to run an island on green energy by 2021. Nicolas de Glenan is part of an archipelago that welcomes some 3,000 visitors a day and houses the largest sailing academy in Europe.
The Nicolas Archipelago is already equipped with a wind turbine and 2 solar power plants. Now authorities plan to run one of its islands exclusively on renewable energy.
Here, you can see the island's current consumption, which is around 8 kilowatts. Photovoltaic production is around 26 kilowatts, and the wind turbine produces around 5 kilowatts. And so, the energy management system allows us to reach an equilibrium between consumption and production.
Enedis, a subsidiary of state-owned power utility, has invested over $280,000 into the project.
Whether on an island or elsewhere in France, photovoltaics will develop in a massive way. Electric vehicles, so part of the storage, will develop. The Linky meter is growing, and so we will have to be able to balance the network in real time.
The island has no connection with the mainland's electricity grid, and it's been increasing its reliance on renewable energy since the 1990s.
Now, the 3-day Chandur Polo Festival has concluded in Pakistan's northwestern province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The festival is celebrated by the tribes of Gilgit-Baltistan and Chitral every summer. More in this report now by our correspondent Kiran Bhatt.
British Prime Minister Winston Churchill once said, "A polo handicap is your passport to the world. What else could be better than playing the game of kings at the roof of the world?" This is Chandur Polo Festival. The festival is organized every year at the world's highest polo ground in the Chandur Pass, Pakistan's northwestern province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Situated at an altitude of over 12,000 feet, the pass lies midway between Chitral and northern Gilgit-Baltistan province.
Even the views to get here, the road though is pretty intense. But it's awesome. Yeah, it's beautiful. The whole atmosphere is really nice. It's different than the festivals in Holland.
The first Chandur Polo tournament took place in 1936. This year, the festival attracted thousands of tourists from around the globe to the scenic valley of Chitral.
It's been really lovely. We arrived yesterday We had a really fun night, campfire, music, dancing.
Chitral won the tournament by beating traditional rivals Gilgit-Baltistan by 6-5 to lift the cup for the 6th consecutive year.
Any player, any polo player who comes from Chitral or the Gilgit-Baltistan, they all dream to be in Chandur, and I pray that they all do. And so they have very sentimental affiliation with Chandur, and we want it better and better each year.
A tent village was established to facilitate tourists. The tournament offered visitors an opportunity to mix with the locals and enjoy the freestyle polo game, cultural night and traditional folk dance. Special arrangements were made by the provincial government to promote tourism.
Right from the top level, from the Prime Minister's level, we are trying to have tourism across the province and across Pakistan, because through tourism we can have jobs, which obviously the youth needs. We can have business activity, economy.
3-day Chandur Polo Festival just ended with all its glory and grandeur. This is a golden feather in Pakistan's cap. We just wish that this feather keeps on shining. Kiran Bhatt, Indus News, Chandur.
Let's start off business news with China, which has increased its government spending by nearly 11% in the first half of the year to boost economic growth. The finance ministry says the spending surge has easily outpaced revenue growth of 3.5%. China has already reported weakened economic growth, down to 6.2% in the second quarter, the slowest in 27 years. Tax revenues grew at under 1%, down from over 5% in the first quarter. Most economists expect Beijing to find other ways to boost its economy as the trade war with the U.S. grinds on. Facebook, meanwhile, says it will not proceed with the launch of its Libra cryptocurrency until regulatory concerns are addressed. This comes after U.S. President Donald Trump had said the social media giant must obtain a banking charter before launching its digital token. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin also voiced serious concerns about Libra, saying it could be used for illicit activity. Facebook says Libra has no intention of competing with any sovereign currencies or entering the monetary policy arena. Vice President David Marcus says the platform will fully address regulatory concerns and has already received appropriate approvals. European markets, meanwhile, have crept up in this morning's early trading. London's benchmark FTSE 100 index inched higher, helped by gains in healthcare shares and the fashion firm Burberry. Earlier in the day, most Asian stock markets gained on a slow day of trading as investors wait for U.S. retail sales data and corporate earnings. Burberry surged 6.5% after its first quarter update showed new designs were boosting sales. Shares in German chemicals company Bayer rose over 2%. Oil prices continued to fall for a second day as more production facilities returned to operation in the Gulf of Mexico. MSCI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan was fractionally up, with losses in Chinese shares capping gains elsewhere in the region. Hong Kong's Hang Seng and South Korea's Kospi index also enjoyed minor gains. China's blue-chip CSI 300 index and the Nikkei 225 in Tokyo traded marginally lower. Well, in the FINA World Championship, China's Cao Yuan and Chen Eisen win gold in the men's 10-meter synchro platform. China's peerless divers made it 7 from 7 at the World Championships. The Olympic champions Yuan and Eisen racked up 486.93 points, swatting aside their nearest rivals by a massive 42 points. Russia's Viktor Minibayev and Alexander Bondar took silver, while Britain's Tom Daley and Lee Matthews settled for bronze. Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. Well, you're all caught up. Thanks very much for watching this bulletin here at Indus News.